Hey, welcome to Write More Light. My name is Sarah. I'm with the Midwest Writing Center, and this is our web series. I'm excited to have you, I'm excited to have you join me today as we work on part of a series. Can't tell yet if it's going to be 2 parts or more on teaching. Today, we're going to talk about how to write a lesson plan. Next time, we're going to talk about pitching a workshop. And they're very closely related. It would just be a really long video if we tried to fit it all in. If you are not familiar with this web series, this is Write More Light. We either teach super short writing lessons or interview someone who's doing cool things in the arts. That's the intro. Then I will give the little lesson. Today's is on writing lesson plans. And then I'll give updates on the Midwest Writing Center, events that are coming up, ways to get involved, etc. And then we'll have a writing prompt. I used to do a 5-minute free write here on screen. And I like that in theory because then you're here with me and I'm holding you accountable. But I think if you've got the time to really write into this prompt, I want to give you that. And if you don't, then you can take it with you. Okay, let's get into it. I started out my education in education. I was going to be a teacher, and so a lot of my ideas about lesson planning are pretty strict. I want to make sure that we're all on the same page about this. We're talking about lesson plans in the arts. I'm specifically going to be talking about writing today, but that shouldn't be prescriptive for you. If some of this stuff works for you in whatever area you work in, especially other areas of the arts, don't assume that this will only work for the art, that this will only work for writing. It probably won't work in like math. I am really bad at math, never tried to teach it. I do try to learn it, but I have the feeling that lots of these things don't apply in the math world. Yeah, so if I get a little strict, which I don't think I will, I have not been in the classroom like this. I was going into secondary education, abandoned that. But I haven't been in the classroom setting in that way in a very long time. So I don't think I'll get too, we'll say prescriptive again. But if I do, take what works, leave what doesn't. There should be a good amount of wiggle room here because, like I said, we're working in the arts. Yeah, don't, just because I'm talking about writing, don't assume that this only applies to writing. Okay, so I'm going to, and I'm realizing now that's across the room from me and I didn't bring it, and that's super annoying. I might have to chop this video up, give myself some time to go grab one of the things I wanted to share. But in lieu of that, we'll skip that part. I have taught a lot of workshops on writing lists as a literary form. So when I'm going to reference that, when I'm going to say, for example, when working with blank topic, that topic's going to be lists. I'm going to open my Google Drive, see if my stuff is there, and then I can just screen share and start holding stuff up. Because that tends to be how I roll, is by holding stuff up. Pardon me for taking up your time. Well, we'll see. Forgive me. So I'm going to be working with the idea of lists as our lesson plan. And I am going to have to cross the room and be be a little awkward about it. I am so sorry, friends. I'm going to pause my recording, and Facebook people, please forgive me. I don't see anyone hanging out with me on Facebook anyway. We are. I got all my doohickeys here. So the very first thing is there's a topic that you want to teach, or maybe you've been asked to teach, or maybe you just want to get into it. You want to see if you can teach. So if that's your situation and not that you are already compelled to, we're going to think about a topic, a writing topic, probably. I can't not say it, but whatever it is, of course, if you're not a writing teacher, you're in some other area of the arts, then whatever that topic is. Think about something you love and something you know a lot about. It's not going to work as well if you don't know a lot about it. There's a whole research phase of this, so that will help a lot. But if you're not excited about it, it's going to be harder. So think about something you love in literature. I love lists, and I started teaching lists as a literary form because people don't think about it very often, or at least newcomers to writing don't consider it as an option, and that makes me sad because I love lists. So what do you love? What do you think about a lot when you're writing? What do you write a lot of? What do you read a lot of? This can be a little difficult if you're just like, well, I love short stories, and that's great. And there are lots of people who teach wonderful classes on that. Personally, I like to be a little more specific, a little more zoomed in on something, but I've taken some incredible short story classes that are just short story. Whatever it is that you interact with a lot, you feel comfortable talking about or just excited about, cool. That'll be the thing that you work on. So I would also say make a list right now or in this process, you can pause me and start making a list of the things that you love and are excited about and know a lot about. I've got, a handful of things that I keep as like my back pocket, things I can teach on. Lists is one of them. Lists is my oldest and dearest, and that's why it's the one that we're talking about here today. Maybe dearest is a little, well, I hold so many things dear. We're gonna talk about this a little later, but I do want to make note that while you're thinking about what you're going to teach, you should also think about how you're going to teach. I don't mean necessarily the words you're going to use, so that's important. But is this going to be in person? Is it going to be hybrid? Is it going to be over video? Or is it maybe going to be like commuter style where it's asynchronous? Maybe you give a little talk and everything else is text. That's a really important part of making the lesson plans, but that'll come into play a little later. Next thing to do after you figured out what the topic is that you want to teach on is research. Almost always is the most important part of anything. Caring is going to get you through the research if the research isn't necessarily exciting. But no matter how much you know about the thing, you'll want to do research. Even in planning on how to talk about planning, I do research. Almost every single time I write a proper lesson plan, like on paper, to submit to someone, I look up other people's lesson plans as an example. So don't be afraid to use your favorite search engine. In general, got a little off track. The research step cannot be skipped. I don't really care if you invented the form. I know plenty of people who have invented forms, And I guarantee that they do research into the form as they're creating it and as they're teaching it. You don't know everything. And even if you did invent the form, there are things that have informed that. There's a reason that you developed this form. It came from somewhere. You have examples somewhere. So here's a list of questions to consider when you're doing your research. Who else is teaching this? What can you learn from them? What can you steal from them? Who's writing this? When I looked for lists, I first had to write down what is a list, because that's really the most complicated thing. We've got grocery lists, and we've got chore lists, right? I think those are what we tend to think of, like to-do lists are what we tend to think of when we think of lists. But then we've got recipes. Those are lists. That can either be the ingredients, right? Or it can be ingredients plus instructions. So to-do list and how-to, those are lists. I've got spells, and I'll share this on the screen in a minute. I've got spells. I've got, sometimes you find really Sam Green, who was the poet laureate of the state of Washington, did something called small noticings. I don't know if he made that up or not, but that's like a list of observations. Things that we see in the world that's like advice is usually a list. It's like, this is a sentence and this sentence is the advice, and then I explain the advice. And then there's, of course, longer narratives. I don't at all feel like this is a genre, or a genre-specific genre. You don't have to write prose, you don't have to write poetry to write a list. It, I think, is often a happy hybrid, which is another reason that I love it. It doesn't have to be anything. There's a prompt I give pretty often that is, the prompt is a list, right? You give the contents of someone's pockets, the contents of their car, the contents of their purse, and ask, what do we know about this person? Write that, which is a great prompt. You can use it. So when you're looking into, say, I want to teach on lists, I need to know who's writing lists. I keep my eye out for lists already. You maybe don't. You maybe have learned from reading and from writing that this is a thing you like, and you hadn't had your eye open to it until it occurred to you that this was a thing, right? So that might be one of your first searches in your favorite search engine. Maybe you've got a cool anthology that's like, this section is this theme, and that theme happens to be lists. Like, that's cool. I have a lot of anthologies. I don't think I have one of those. Then the next thing to consider, once you're looking through, you're collecting content, and I will say, I collect this content. I keep it. I've got a folder on my computer. I've got some Google documents, and I have physical paper folders. Sometimes it works out really well because, like, you got it in a packet already or whatever. Sometimes you end up, see if I have anything here. I don't. If you're me and you're already on the lookout, you throw a Post-it into a book and write list. If list is the thing, can be anything. So then from here, once we are compiling our pile of things in this area that we want to teach, what are some spins on this form? When I start out thinking about lists, I start out thinking of to-do lists, maybe how-tos. There's a how-to I've been working on for 13 years that I've never finished. And it's a step-by-step, right? That's what makes it a list. And then in the instructions that you're giving is where you get to play around with language, but it still is in that list form. So what are some spins on this form? I just said within the list, we go to how to. There's somebody, recipes are a really good example of this, especially like recipe blogs. No, I take that back. Recipes are a really good example of this because you get the ingredients and then you get step-by-step instructions, right? Recipes are how-tos, period. It might be you've got like an advanced cookbook and it doesn't define jargon anymore, but that's where you get to play in that form. So there's, just the straightforward combined ingredients, combined dry ingredients, whatever. But when you're writing, you manipulate the language here. So you decide if you're combining the ingredients like a thing, you decide if the word combine is the one you want to use. And that alone does a lot of tweaking to the implications, the meaning, the message of the piece. But with lists, again, looking at spins on form, Becca Klaver, who, by the way, will be reading at Roz Talks on Thursday in Rock Island with Erica Lewis and Melissa Conway and Tutu. Becca Klaver writes spells, and that's a list, absolutely. There's the story Girl by Jamaica Kincaid, which people love. People know that's the list that people think of. I didn't think of it as a list, though it is on its face. It's a list. It's absolutely a list in every way. It's instructions. And it's a short story. And that is written in a prose block, I think. So it doesn't look like a list. Anyway, you can find a spin with lists a little harder, or maybe it's a little easier. It's different. Lists are different because we can manipulate them so easily. Finding a twist on them, especially since I am trying to think outside of my own knowledge right now, is a little difficult. But receipts are great. Love receipts. We had an intern do a receipt a couple of summers ago. That was really excellent. And especially then you get to play with cost if it's a receipt, and cost can mean so many things. Gosh, I love lists. Okay, so whatever it is you're looking for, you're asking who else is teaching this, who is writing this, what are some spins on this form, where did it come from? The list as a literary form, I feel like, comes from the list as a utilitarian form. But with most things, with most literary genres, with most literary forms and practices, it came from somewhere. It has a history. There's intertextuality, and it's worth looking into the inception of this form. It's also possible that this is a form that someone invented. That's dope. You want to know that. Does this form have an ethos or a mission? As far as I know, lists do not, but it is good to know. If you're teaching something that has a history, it may have a purpose. It probably has a purpose. And some of that is like subverting, or was once about subverting the form, or was once about subverting something. But you're going to want to know that, because you don't want to abuse it unless you're abusing it intentionally. I'll say you don't want to abuse it. It's possible you want to manipulate it, but you want to do that intentionally. You don't want to do that out of ignorance. What stories does this form intend to tell? It doesn't have to be a universal thing. But there's probably a tendency within the list. The list is within the form. The list is a very domestic form from its inception. It's a domestic form born of utility. I may be listing animals in my pasture. I may be listing the chores I have to do today. I may be listing the saints, but I'm doing it on purpose with a purpose, and that purpose is utilitarian. When I say domestic, I mean household, I mean at home. But of course, it can very much be work. I would just say that most work was born of domestic work. So the stories that lists tend to tell, now first, lists can tell any story. I would say that any genre can tell any story, but the list tends to tell a domestic story. Another question to ask, when did this genre start being a genre? Or when was the genre born? When was this form born? When did we start to see it? Those are all very similar questions, but they're also different questions, because I'm not ever going to find the first list ever written. I'm also probably not going to find the first list ever written as art. But if you're looking at comic poetry, meaning poetry within comics, if you're looking at I was like, I'm going to stick to lists because then I don't have to worry about talking about other genres. And then here I am without a list of other genres to mention. Yeah, there's always a history to the piece. You want to try and figure out that history to a genre. Is this form popular? Was it once popular? Where was it popular? Where was it invented? And with whom? There are a lot of genres that are cultural. There's a type of poem I really love that I think comes from Malaysia, called the Piantun. I don't teach on that form. I have tried writing in that form 3 times. But it's a really cool, really powerful, really versatile form with a lot of rules surrounding it. So if I were going to teach on it, I would probably talk about like why this form exists and what purpose it serves with the culture it comes from and how language works there, if it's a different language. I would say in the US, there are a lot of things that are specific to Black or Native cultures that have come into the mainstream or the mainstream milieu anyway. And you don't want to teach on these things ignorantly. You just don't. And it is important to know whose work you're using so that you're creating better work, creating better artists, are better informed, and are not a jerk. Not being a jerk is also important when you're teaching, which is something I will get into in a little bit, about some of the reasons that some things are best practice. When you're doing your research, ask as many questions as you can think of. Write down questions as you're doing your research, write down questions before you do your research, take lots of notes, bookmark things on your browser or photocopy them and put them in a physical folder. You want to have more information than you need. Asking lots of questions will help you develop. My notebook is too far away. I do everything on paper. You don't have to. It's probably easier to read your handwriting if it's not handwriting. Asking as many questions as you can in the research phase will help you to develop your lesson in a holistic way for a variety of students, in such that you can answer questions and so that you are more aware and prepared and in tune with the form. If you're not in tune with the form, you're not going to be able to teach it or write it very well. There are flukes, there are exceptions to that, but if you're not coming to this form and coming to this lesson and coming to this classroom with a holistic perspective on the form, it's just not going to go as well as if you were coming from a holistic perspective. Holistic in this context means you know the history, you're sensitive to the nuance, and you care about the people responsible for the form, you care about the history of the form, care about your students. There will probably be a second research phase too, and that will be, I mean, that could be, I think it should be later than the first one. I think you should know your content before you worry about your audience. I say that all the time about writing in general. But the second research phase should be working to match your venue and your audience. Maybe you work in the same venue with the same audience all the time as in secondary school, and you're really familiar and you don't need to do any further research with that. But if this is your first time pitching a workshop, you're going to have to think about that. That'll come into play again in our pitching a workshop video. But it is, when you're creating a lesson plan, paramount to think about who you are teaching. That has to be a consideration. And when you are pitching, it's going to come up. You're going to need to include that information. Write down your ideal audience in this phase in your rough draft of your lesson plan. And it will help you to design your lesson correctly. You'll want to think about the age and demographic, ability, language, maybe gender, maybe other factors of identity, maybe ethnicity, maybe, I already said language, maybe sexuality, maybe location, accessibility to the location. There's a lot of stuff to consider there. Again, that is very important to the lesson planning bit, but will be more helpful, and we'll go into more detail in the pitching phase of this. When also matters. Do you need breaks? Do you need to feed people or give them time to eat? Do you need to do something physically active? And in that, we're also considering how heavy is the content. Do you need to include time for like a grounding exercise or a breathing break or decompression or physical activity? Maybe you already have a physical activity as part of your work. So then format meaning online, hybrid, in-person, or like I said, the commuter style where it's asynchronous. Something online might include a slideshow, where the same thing in person might be a whiteboard. Maybe you do more interactive activities in person. How are you adapting that to the screen? All of these things are different and require different considerations. Location and ability will come into play a lot in this in this part of the planning phase. In your research, we're moving on now. We'll come back to that when we get to the physical part of writing the lesson plan. In your research, you definitely came across new writing and ideas. Don't lose it. Take notes. However you best take notes, take notes. I already said this, folders on my computer, digital online documents and physical stuff to keep track of all of the lists that I want to, and whatever it is that I want to use as examples. Here's the packet I made last time I taught lists. First poem here. Oh, always do this. If you're handing out a packet or providing a packet, you need to include, along with the piece, the author, the title of whatever it came from. Like, is it an excerpt from a book, or is it like this first one is a poem from a book of poetry, and the year and the publisher. That's not just best practice, but will also keep you out of trouble and will help your students find the work. So this is, and I'll go into why this is a big packet in a moment. First one here is Becca Claver, Spell for a Headache. Second one is, which is from Ready for the World on Black Lawrence Press. Next one I have here is Small Noticings from All That Might Be Done by Sam Green from Carnegie Mellon. Now this, you may notice, has breaks here. It's a collection. It's in a collection of poems, so we can just look at one of these, or we can look at them as a set. Depends how we're all feeling at the time when the lesson is happening. Here's a Advice to a Trauma Survivor by Tara Hardy. This is not one that I teach in the classroom. I'll talk about that in a moment. What you need from the New American Field Guidance Songbook by Ryan Collins. Hey, he's the director of the Writing Center. And I don't know if he knows it's here. One of many pieces that starts with the sentence "instead of dying" by Laura Haldeman. Sorry, I want to show it because it's not. And then I think this is the opening from Like Water for Chocolate by Laura Esquivel, or Laura Esquivel probably, which is a novel, and that's a recipe. I'll talk more about that in a moment. Just kidding, that's the next thing I'm talking about. When you're in your classroom or whatever that looks like to you, are you going to share every piece in your packet? You can. I don't know the format of your class. I don't tend to. I tend to plan a 2-hour class with a break, and that's not a lot of time. There are pros and cons, of course, to doing that. One is you're providing more content than you are teaching. I think that can be nice because now your students are going home with more. There's more information there. But why not teach on it, right? My consideration is usually time, but for the piece by Tara Hardy, that piece has some potential for triggers. I would say always provide a content warning, but. If something has that potential, especially if it's got a high chance at being triggering, you don't need to bring that into your classroom. Anything you're trying to teach, any technique or tool or like thing that you're trying to teach, you can find somewhere else. Now, if that were somehow the only advice list poem in the world, it's not. Then I might make a consideration for that. But it's not. If it was the only list poem that used X technique, which isn't related to lists, but is something I'm teaching in like a long form list class, I would leave that as an option. I would not teach it. I would say I would provide a different poem, a different piece that maybe isn't a list or maybe isn't advice, and say, we're just looking at this aspect right now. If you think you have a stomach for this trauma poem, please read it. No one is going to be forced to do that. You can't force people to do that, but people may, either out of ignorance, because you didn't give them that warning, or because they want to please you. So if there's something specific from that poem that I want to teach, I will find it somewhere else so that I don't have to hurt my students. You don't want to trigger your students. You don't. I know every once in a while, folks will give flack for having trigger warnings or content warnings. They think that there's a certain amount of sensitivity that's too much, and that may be true. I don't think that that's true in this context. When we go to movies, movies have MPAA ratings to say, here's the audience that this movie is appropriate for, and here's why. It'll say strong language or nudity or violence. And we've accepted that. It's the same thing here. We just haven't historically seen it. We haven't historically seen it in literature, but we should be better about that. We should be protecting our students, and we should be protecting our readers. And that isn't an overprotective thing. That isn't sheltering them from the cruelties of the world or something, which is a different topic, but no one, period, point blank, this is how the body works. No one can learn in a state of being triggered. In that state of activation, the body is incapable of learning. And if the point of teaching is to facilitate learning, we can't be shutting down our students. So I love that poem. I love it as a perspective on I love it for a lot of reasons. Tara Hardy's super, super talented. But I keep it with the content warning. This talks about abuse, assault, and addiction. Don't read it if that's going to harm you. There are other advice poems in the world. There are other trauma poems in the world. I think that's a really good one. I think it's worth reading for most people, but I'm not going to review it in class with a bunch of people who don't know each other, who maybe don't feel like they can be vulnerable in this setting. And that's best practice, because I want my students to learn. I want to give them all the content I can. And I want them to enjoy the class. And there's no point in engaging with the arts if it's not either fun or cathartic, and triggering people is neither of those things. And learning shouldn't be. There are a lot of people who have classroom related trauma, and they're probably not coming to my class because of that. Yeah, so yeah, always provide a content warning. I like to say content warning over trigger warning for a couple of reasons. It's a less contested word is one of them. Another is I'm telling you about what to expect from the content here. I'm not telling you what your triggers are or what potential triggers are in the piece. For one thing, I don't know your trauma. I don't know your triggers. You don't know mine. You can't tell by looking at me. But there are some things that, some content that is more likely to ostracize people. So do you share every piece in a packet? I would say if you've got a lot of time, there's not a lot of reason not to. I also think it's fun to just have extras for people who are really excited about the content. But probably I know more than I put in the packet anyway. Hopefully I've done enough research to do that. Something I like to do, and I see this a lot in other classes, so I know that other people like to do this too, is choose a couple of really standout pieces that I'm going to teach from, 2 or 3. Like I said, I usually keep it to about 2 hours. I usually do one-offs. You don't have to. You can do whatever kind of class you want to do. But I like to choose 2 or 3 and have students read them aloud. Then build conversation around those pieces, ask questions. From conversation, people learn. Asking open-ended questions causes conversation. We want people to talk to one another. It's great if they disagree. It's great if they agree. Conversation sparks ideas. And I guess we can just scoot over to objectives now. Objectives are part of lesson plans. They might not be in this setting, but they are like the point of lesson plans. Lesson plans are like, here is my plan for meeting this objective. So the objective is probably something like learning, right? For me, I want my students to come out with a piece written, or at least a draft written. That's my objective. But if your objective is learning, you're going to need to say how you know they've learned something. This is something when teaching artists that I really, really love, because artists are so often like, I want my students to leave happy. And then, my teacher brain is like, okay, how do you know they're happy? How do I quantify this? And that's actually not hard, but it tickles me. I mean, I can't, stick a thermometer in them and it'll come up happy, but I can see them smiling. I can see them sharing, right? They're proud of their work, so they're sharing it, or they're excited by their work, so they're sharing it because they want feedback. Or if it's small children, right? Parents are going to tell you, or whoever their people are gonna say, "Oh my God, I heard about your class." There are ways where you can quantify happiness as far as an objective for lesson plans. I would probably not use that language. I would say objective, student learned X as evidenced by Y. If my goal really is for my student to enjoy themselves, which is dope, love that. I think education should be fun. Then you'll say objective learning blank content, and or student discovers joy in this content as evidenced by their reaction or whatever. Yeah. Yeah, okay. I actually am doing fine without my notes, as it turns out. I've done this before. Putting it together is the hard part. Putting it together is the entire process for me. I already said I write everything by hand. And when I'm making like my end step, I'm sitting down. I've been standing and I'm moving so I can sit down. Putting it together as an end step is like a silly process for me of having 14 drafts that I handwrite and tear out until they're perfect. But that's helpful for me. Most people, I think in this day and age, don't write by hand anyway. So it's a lot less annoying for them, but it's helpful for me. And I'm going to do this, I was planning to screen share. Because I'm not providing you with worksheets right now, much as I might enjoy doing that, I didn't create that. I didn't budget time for it. This is something I do almost every time I do a lesson plan. This is frozen. Am I frozen? Okay, well, I hope you're bearing with me, friends, because I am not bearing with you. Something which you can't see me do because my stuff is frozen. Okay, great, you can, is look up lesson plan template on your favorite search engine. I'm frozen again. Not going to say that this is my favorite search engine. It is the one that is available to me. It's the one most of us use. I'm just not trying to endorse anything. And this will tend to be like a spreadsheet, and it'll say objectives, it'll say lessons, it'll say activities. If you're a worksheet person, if you're a template person, these are great. I am one of those people. When my computer works. This was so silly. Maybe we can close some windows, huh? Maybe that'll help. Well, anyway, that's something you can do. It'll be columns and rows. Sorry, my recording stopped there. Okay, we're gonna start screen sharing again. So depending on your age group, you can play with this, or your personal amount of whimsy, they can play with this. I take these with several grains of salt, but also just as inspiration to see, am I forgetting anything? Is there part of this process that I missed? I've done this a lot, so usually I'm okay on my own, but I just want to show you that that is possible. If that page loads again, I'll show you, but we may be on our own here. So I was going to also, how long have we, oh, we're taking a lot of time here, aren't we? Trying to get to, actually, I can just show you this. This is not lists that I've got here. This is a draft. This is the class title. Here are readings to do on writing, activist writing, writing that turned into activism, notes for myself, things to look into, and then a to-do list for students in advance of the class. Then I've got step 1 is its own whole page. I do it outline style. Anytime I'm asking questions, I have it highlighted here. And then you'll see these are blank. Just do one side for some reason. So step 2, we have a call to action. You can see those important notes. This is, oh, there's a 3A and a 3B and a 3C. And there's step 4, 5, 6. Okay, here we go. Here's lists are cool, which is what I titled it because I didn't know what to title it. Lists are cool. I've got time for an introduction. I can't read this. Then I'm going to introduce a prompt. Then we're going to write for 20 to 30 minutes. Then we're going to have a break. Then we're going to share our writing. I started out knowing how much time I was going to have. And I don't know if I knew how many students I was going to have. That makes a difference in how long you provide for introductions and how much you ask in an introduction. Make sure you have that planned out too. You will want that. You'll want to know what you're asking for in your introduction, and you're going to want to introduce yourself in 2 ways. The same way that you're asking your students to introduce themselves, and also you may want to provide some background on yourself and this form. Why are you the person who is qualified to teach on this form? I'm not of the opinion that a teacher is necessarily an authority, but you will tend to be the expert in the room. So this is my little intro here. It says, I love this kind of form. Here's why I love it. Here's my experience with it. Here's what I'm going to bring to you today. I love to also put the plans right out front, have an agenda, keep everything in a clear container so that my students know what to expect from me. Being a predictable teacher is useful and helpful. I had, it looks like, let's see how this is loading here. No, the Wi-Fi is just not agreeing with me. It looks like I had hyperlinks in addition to my paper pamphlet to poems to read, and that I asked students to read them. And I said, I want to break this one down. I wrote down breakdown in parentheses. And then the questions I asked surrounding lists. How is this poem a list? And what gives it power? That's a question I ask pretty much every time I teach any piece of writing, is what gives this piece power? You don't have to like it, right? We don't all have to like anything. But something about it made it tick, made it work. And depending on what we're teaching in that moment, I'll say, you know, where I asked, why is this a list? Because it's not always clear. But I'll ask, you know, I do a class on details. And I'll ask, what made, you know, we've all got this image in our head of what this room looked like. Where is the textual evidence that we're correct? For example, I asked, what do all these pieces have in common after we've read them all? And then I gave some and I always do this, and I think it's actually not best practice, but I always give 2 prompts. And it seems to maybe overwhelm people. So learn from my mistake. I can't seem to stop myself. I always like to have a very specific prompt and a really open one because I don't want to be prescriptive. But it doesn't tends to be that people don't know which to choose. Maybe I'll learn from me. Yeah, okay. So I can't screen share because apparently that takes up too much bandwidth. That's frustrating, but I think there are 2 computers streaming in this house in addition to me, so it makes sense. So an important thing, I was going to screen share and like write out a fresh lesson plan with you. I apologize that I won't be doing that. But you saw how it looked in my notebook at least. Things you want to make sure you know when you're making your lesson plan. How much time do you have? Is this a 2-hour one-off? Is this a 3-hour one-off? Is this 1 hour twice a week for 3 weeks? You know, and if it is a multi-class situation, you want to have a different lesson plan each day that builds to a larger lesson. My objective, I think I said this already, my objective is always that my students leave with a piece of writing. It doesn't have to be finished. It probably won't be finished, but a proper draft, proper meaning they wrote a draft of something. They have something to work with. They have something to hold and go home with, or maybe they're already at home, but they leave with something. Budget breaks, be clear, be honest with yourself about the need for them and how long they're going to take. You give a 5-minute break, people will take 8. You want to make sure that you prepare and budget time for discussion. Discussion is good and helpful and healthy in learning. You got to budget time for it. You have to, unless it's a lecture, but then that seems very just not of the arts. You want to know your audience as much as possible. You want to know your intention. You want to know your content. If people ask you for more work like this, you better have it in your back pocket. I always say right up at the front, actually, maybe I can screen share. We're going to try again because at least the slideshow loaded. Are we sharing? Maybe. So here's my intro. If you can see name and pronouns, something about you that sounds like a lie, or see, I gave too many prompts here for the icebreaker anyway, your favorite or dream costume for Halloween or whatever. Here's a breakdown of, and this is also when I would say, here's what the class is going to look like. I clearly neglected to put that in the slideshow. That's okay. That'll be better next time. Then here's some types of lists. And then I ask right here, tell me what I'm missing. This is a way to engage your students. When they're engaged, they're learning. These are some great poems. These are the ones that are in the packet I had. Here's if you wanted more. This is examples of what those poems are. These are the prompts. And this is, I did this for the free generative writing workshops. That's what the specific slideshow is for. So that's with Iowa City Poetry and Prompt Press and Porchlight Literary. So now you know that. Those are great. Highly recommend them. Once a month, they have a free generative writing class. I go to them a lot. So I really do love them. Shoot. Okay. We're like really over time. I hope this was helpful to you. We will pick this up again next time. Get it all written out. Know what's in it. That's the most important thing, is that you know your content and you have a plan. I am not much of a planner in life, but I am a real serious planner when I have classes and lessons and I'm in charge of a room. Because you have to know, you have to. If you don't know your content, you can't be talking about it. You're not the expert in the room if you're not the expert in the room. So let's just, oh, here's another book I want to recommend. Syllabus by Linda Berry. Everybody recommends it because it's that good. It's exactly what it looks like, but it is lesson plans and writing prompts, and it's wonderful and pretty. It's a syllabus, Linda Berry, Notes from an Accidental Professor, and that's exactly what it is. It's her syllabuses and lesson plans and work. But not my planner. There it is. Okay, so this week is a big week at the Writing Center. Last week was too. I know you're getting tired. No. This week we've got, tomorrow is Wednesday night free writes. We invite really any middle school, high school age, we don't care where you go to school or whatever, students to come and hang out with us from 4 to 6 p.m. at the Writing Center. That's at the ground floor of the Rock Island Public Library at 401 19th Street in downtown Rock Island. We've got Wi-Fi, we've got printers. I'm not there currently, so you don't have to worry about someone else using the Wi-Fi. It's just us. Excuse me. We've got activities. If you want to sit there and write, if you want to workshop, get to know your peers, get to know people who are interested in the same things you are, come, we'll have a good time. Then Thursday, super exciting. I will pick up the other half of this Write More Light info session and talk about pitching a workshop. We will then at 7 p.m. doors are at 7 at Ross Talks. The event is headlining Erica Lewis, who's from the Bay Area. She's won like every award there is to win in poetry. Her new book she's on tour for is called Mahogany. She will be reading with Becca Claver, who I teach in my list class. Melissa Conway. Oh, I have Melissa's book back here. Awesome. And Tutu, it's going to be really incredible. And it's going to be a really incredible reading. It's at Ross Talks at 2108 3rd Avenue in Rock Island. They have excellent food. It's a killer venue. Everyone there is awesome. Doors are 7, readings at 8. I really can't underscore how cool this event is going to be. I can't wait. Then on Saturday, we have Writers Studio from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Central Time. We do have that both online and in person, but it is not hybrid. The in-person group meets at the Writing Center. Again, that's at the ground floor of the Rock Island Public Library. The online group meets on Zoom with me. I want to state this is a workshop group, meaning critique, meaning we work together to help each other become better writers. Now, the goal of my group is to help you get what you want out of your piece, not to tell you how to write to my taste. Coming up, currently, things to know, the Foster Stall Chapbook series is currently accepting submissions from anywhere served by Arts Midwest. So that's like 8 states or something. You saw last week, we had Alec Hirschman on Write More Light. He was the 2021 winner. That book came out this year. Yeah, sorry, the publishing years and the contest years are different. A chapbook is a super short book, 30 to 60 pages, maybe. Usually it's on a theme. We are not genre prescriptive, as I keep saying. So poetry, prose, hybrid, whatever it is, If you've got a chapbook manuscript, send it our way. Full information, of course, is on our website, mwcqc.org. We're not accepting illustrations or translations at this time for that contest, but if you've got questions, let us know. You know how to find me. We're also partnering on a publication with St. Ambrose University's Galvin Hall, Galvin Fine Arts Center, called Radical Hospitality. I will be giving another talk on what that means and how to get involved, but we're taking super short submissions. Should be about 3 minutes when read aloud, so not longer than that. So poetry and super short prose. Translation is accepted for that. But both the translator and the original content need to be by someone in our service area. So that is Clinton, Scott, Muscatine counties in Iowa, Henry, Mercer, and Rock Island counties in Illinois. Looking for original pieces that interrogate the question or topic of radical hospitality. Radical hospitality meaning we're not accepting people, we're welcoming them. It's a beautiful project. I'm really excited about it. All folks chosen for publication will receive $100 for publication. We'll have a audio recording and podcast with all the contributors. And from those chosen, we will have a reading and the audience will choose favorites. And there's more money involved in that. First place for that is $500. But I think 3 or 4 places receive money. So, okay. That's what we've got going on right now. We do have an opening on our board of directors, and I want to say a committee spot available too. So you don't have to be on the board to be on a committee. You don't have to be on a committee to be on the board. So you can write us about that, mwc@mwcqc.org. Okay, time for your prompt. Please set 5 minutes for yourself to do this. Take as much time as you need, of course, but don't skimp yourself on time. And write into the idea of the expert in the room. As always, thanks for hanging out, and please write more light into your life.